airplane place.
We didn't do a ribbon cutting.
Greenleaf, we did.
Oh, Greenleaf. Oh.
So what are you guys doing about the
People were
concrete
there.
business? They just gonna leave it on hold?
You should have told me. I would have come out.
He could do a floor, like right now, he could, but
Yeah.
after serving him, he won't.
Yeah.
I would have come out.
The 75-year-old lady that was running it, bless her heart, I mean, she had her way of doing things. For instance, not related to the business, she's a CPA.
You
Told me
know,
she still has to do her taxes. She says,
all I care
I
about
do them by hand first. Then when I'm done, I put them in TurboTax, double check.
chemo and then
The
So-
CPA?
So,
Mm-hmm, yeah,
yeah, she was
so
training me on
so you
the way of running the business now. And every online order that comes in goes to USPS.com and verifies the address. They entered it. And then you have to write good address on your paper next to it.
You do?
Yeah.
Still wouldn't.
Good afternoon.
really.
Good afternoon, how are you?
Good.
Warm out there.
It's warm out.
Feels
It's
good.
supposed to maybe snow, I saw on
Saturday.
Was it Saturday?
But did you have some pain then or
All right now.
no?
We look that far ahead.
Rain and snow mix,
But
possible.
when John went in for his regular blood.
That's spring. Is it spring yet? When is it? Not,
March
is it?
21st, yeah,
Today?
what's today? No, today's the 19th.
Not again, in your regular, $31.
I thought it was the 21st or the 20th. But they say March 1st
Then
is
when
the
did you go on a
almost
bender
like
last weekend?
nautical north and true north. Now there's like nautical spring and true spring or something like that. I don't know, but.
All right, because I knew we were
Positive,
close, and I
negative,
thought we
in
were
other words,
supposed
what
to.
they
Yeah.
say sometimes.
Even spring in
Yeah,
Idaho, I've learned, very-
Yeah.
I've been to a lot of baseball games that snowed on me.
Yeah. Yep. And then we started out with the t-shirt and shorts. And then you're in a parka.
Oh, yeah. Look at like.
Yeah, the project you like.
That's right. I just
Well,
wanna
when
make
my
sure
VA
you don't want people to
appreciate
say,
it, I'll ask.
And
there's
if
something
they
rogue
won't
and
do it, it's
rogue for
$31.
choice, but not invited.
It's great that,
I don't care.
Still.
I don't think anybody does. Yeah. By the way, on your email,
But if it's elevated, then
we
it's
start
constant community
walkway,
save their life. Because now he has a 40% chance of survival.
Yeah, no, absolutely, makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
so.
That's right, yeah.
I went to have my test right after.
That's right, and that was the advice that
Does it run in any of his,
someone else
family?
did. Yeah, but I thought, oh yeah, that's right. There's
Yeah,
the process. So
I thought, I'm not gonna.
Okay, should we get this party started? I see there's people here for it. Councilor Allgood will join us as quickly as he can. He obviously is doing double duty this time of year with, the legislature, and I know they're trying to roar along to finish up, their time at the Capitol, so, he's not with us at the moment, but hopefully he'll be joining us shortly. So, welcome you here. Excited to have this. This is a, where's the, too much paperwork here. So this is a workshop, for an overview of the Fair Labor Standards Act, and I believe this was kind of spearheaded by Councilor Williams, if I'm not mistaken, some questions on that, in regards to our police, things of that nature. So thankful for that. Is it Andrea Rasmussen?
That's correct.
So thank you for being here from the, and you're with the U.S. Department of Labor?
I am, yes.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. So we'll just kind of turn it over to you. Looks like you have a little presentation. We'll go through that.
I do.
And go from there.
Perfect,
Thank
thank
you.
you. And I appreciate Mayor, council members, thank you for having me today, or this afternoon, I guess. I am Andrea Rasmussen. I'm the Community Outreach and Resource Planning Specialist for the U.S. Department of Labor. And our main office is out of the Portland District Office. We cover all of Oregon and all of Idaho, and we do have a local office here in Boise, and that's where I'm located. So, I'm going to go through the Fair Labor Standards Act, but first I'm going to give you a brief overview of what does the wage and hour do. Most of you have heard of OSHA, right? Under the Department of Labor. We're a sister agency. Most people have not heard of us, right? We're more obscure, but what we do, right, is we ensure that people are paid correctly. That's basically our mission. So we not only enforce the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is minimum wage and overtime, right? We also enforce the Family Medical Leave Act. We enforce government contracts like the Service Contract Act, Davis-Bacon Act. We enforce various agricultural laws as well, and wage garnishment under the Consumer Protection Credit Protection Act. So there's lots of different regulations and laws that we enforce. And my job is education and training, not only for groups like yourself, but advocacy groups, employer groups, worker groups. So if you ever want me to come back and do training on different other laws, just let Shelley know, and I am certainly willing and available to do that. Okay, so Fair Labor Standards Act has been around since 1939, so this law has been in effect for a long, long time. And it basically covers, like I said earlier, minimum wage, overtime, child labor, and record keeping. I'm not going to really touch on child labor today, but the other issues within the law. So what is the first thing? Well, the law, written again back in 1939, the definition of work is work that's suffered or permitted is considered work time. That's the actual official language within the law. So if somebody performs work, right, by, for the employer, that time needs to be paid, whether the employer has approved it or not, right? So hopefully the people are working when they're approved to work, but if somebody does work for an employer outside of what their regular work time is, then that time also needs to be paid, right? It's for the benefit of the employer. So one of the things we get a lot of questions about is on-call time, right? When does on-call time have to be paid? When does it not have to be paid? So first thing is, if someone has to stay on the employer's premises, for example, that time needs to be paid. If they don't have to stay on the premises, but they can't really use their own time for their own purposes, then that time has to be paid. So an example of this would be somebody that has to sit by their phone because, let's say they're a counselor or a therapist and they have to answer calls in the evening from people and they have such regular conversations that they can't really use their own time for their own purposes. Versus somebody, the second example, for example, is, hey, I carry a pager, I'm a doctor, let's say, and the whole evening I don't get called, and tonight I don't get called. I'm working, I'm doing laundry, I'm cleaning my house, I'm going out to eat, whatever it is. I'm using my time for my own purposes. I am on call if there's an emergency, right? But if I'm never called, then I don't have to be paid for that time because I'm able to use the time for my own purposes. I forgot to say, if you guys do have questions, you can please interrupt and just ask as we go along. Okay. All right, so meals and rest periods. Under federal law, there is no requirement for breaks. Those are tied to individual state laws. So some state laws have break laws and some states don't. Idaho is one of those laws that does not have breaks. So there's no requirement for breaks within the law. Now, employers like yourself, right, can require breaks or put breaks within their, employee handbook as requirements. But there's no specific federal law or state law here in Idaho that requires breaks. Now, for someone to not be paid for their break, their lunch break, right, that has to be 30 minutes or longer, and it has to be completely relieved of duty. So if somebody's sitting at their desk and eating their sandwich and answering the phone or doing whatever, right, that time is work time. So to not pay somebody for their lunch, they have to be completely relieved of work for those 30 minutes. And a lunch break has to be, for it to not be paid, has to be at least 30 minutes long. Okay, any breaks that are shorter than that, I'm just going to the bathroom. I step out and take a smoke break. Whatever it is, those breaks, 5 to 20 minutes long, those have to be paid. Okay? So those are the different requirements about how breaks have to be paid. But again, please.
I do have a question about that for the police officers in the back. If they are on a lunch, but they're on call, right, technically, then does that fall under a break or not?
So if they're able to step away, they're not getting phone calls, even though they're on call, right? If they're able to step away completely from work and actually eat, then if that's at least 30 minutes long, then they don't have to be paid, right? Now, if they get a call in the middle of that and they have to go do the work or they have to answer the phone for whatever reason, at that point then, that 30 minutes has been, interrupted, and they do need to be paid for that.
Yeah, that sounds like an accounting nightmare.
Yeah.
Better just to give them the break.
Right. Yeah. And so depending how that works, right?
Pay them for it, I mean.
Right, exactly. That just depends on how you guys are gonna, how the human resources does their timesheets and those kind of things. But there should be some sort of mechanism, and I know I've talked to Shelley before, that there is some sort of mechanism here at the city where if somebody doesn't get their break, that they can annotate that and say, hey, I didn't get paid my lunch break, and so that time gets paid.
I guess that's gonna be a question I'll have for you then when she's done. The police get paid for their lunch breaks, right? Okay.
I was just confirming with Cassie, but yeah, they get paid for their whole shift.
Okay, good.
So their shift, if it's 10 hours or 12 hours, they will eat whenever they can during that shift, but the entire time is going to be paid.
And so I would guess same thing with fire department.
Yes. Yep.
Perfect. Okay, so that kind of talks about the things that are most relevant for you guys when it comes to hours worked, right? But very important to note, again, somebody should be paid for all their hours worked. When they're working, that's paid time, right? So then we're not going to discuss minimum wage because I can tell you that pretty much everybody gets paid more than minimum wage at the federal level. Minimum wage right now is $7.25 an hour. So that hasn't changed, and Idaho follows federal law. So that's why we're not talking about minimum wage today, because I'm very confident that there's very few people, even in the whole state of Idaho, that make less than $7.25 an hour. So that's why we're not talking about that. So what is overtime requirements, right? Overtime requirements are time and a half after 40 hours in a work week, okay? So once somebody hits 40 hours in 1 minute, that 1 minute needs to be paid at time and a half. Now, there is different requirements, and I'm going to talk about that for public employees, right, that are part of a public agency or city like yourselves. But for everybody else in the working world, right, once they hit 40 hours in a work week, that time has to be paid at time and a half, okay? So for employees of state and local governments, like the people you oversee, there's what's called compensatory time, comp time is what we usually say, right? And so comp time, right, is how you can pay compensation for employees in lieu of paying overtime. Okay, so people can accrue comp time. When they accrue comp time, it needs to be either paid out at no less than time and a half their regular rate, or it can be accrued when they first earn it at time and a half their regular rate, right? So depending how it's done, either way, comp time needs to be paid out at time and a half like it would overtime. Okay, so that's the requirement. And again, some entities accrue those hours. Somebody gets 20 hours of comp time, let's say, and then they pay it out at time and a half, or they just say, okay, this person accrued 20 hours, we're going to put it on the books as 30 hours. So time and a half of 20. Either way is fine. So these are the definitions, right? An employee of a public agency is engaged in public safety, emergency response, or seasonal activity. And by seasonal activity, that means activity that has additional hours tied to it seasonally, like clearing the roads for snow or doing accounting during tax season. That's what they're referring to. Can accumulate, under our law, under federal law, not more than 480 hours of comp time. Okay, and once somebody's reached their max of 480, and that that work in those type of work, then they have to be paid time and a half. Okay, so that's what federal law says. For everybody else that doesn't fall into those three categories, the accrual rate ends at 240, and once they have accumulated at least 240 hours, then they have to be paid at time and a half. Okay, so if somebody's been a long-term employee, maybe they've worked for the city of Caldwell for 20, 30 years, right, there is a chance that they've reached their max, and any hours that they work that is overtime, right, after 40 hours in a work week, then would be paid out at time and a half because they've already met their max and how many hours they can accrue in comp time. And we already kind of talked about this, right? But it's important to note that comp time does get paid out if the employee leaves employment, okay? So you can either calculate it based on the last regular rate the employee received, or if you don't want to pay it out because obviously people get raises over the years, then they can also do an average regular rate to determine over the last 3 years what was their average regular rate, and then the comp time that's owed gets paid out at that average rate. So regardless, though, any comp time that they've accumulated does have to be paid out. Questions so far? Okay. I think I'm explaining things well then, apparently. So the next set is fire protection and law enforcement employees. So there are specific rules for them outside of everybody else, right? And so fire protection and law enforcement employees have specific requirements or additional things that can be done, exemptions for them for overtime based on this law. And so their overtime compensation can be figured out in terms of work periods of 28 consecutive days, and the ratio of 28 consecutive days to 212 hours for fire protection and 171 hours for law enforcement or police. Now, I know the city of Caldwell does the 212 for fire protection and 160 for police employees. And that means for your police, they're actually you guys are paying more than what the law requires, right? You're doing an additional payments of overtime after 160 instead of the 171. So again, this just gives them with some more detail on the slide, right? So for fire protection activities, right, those who have worked a period of at least 7 but not less than 28 consecutive days, right? No overtime has to be paid as long as they have not worked more than 212 hours, right? Same again for your police department. If they've worked, at least 7 and up to 28 days, right? If they've worked, again, in case in the city of Caldwell, right, if they've worked less than 160 hours in that period of time, then they don't have to be paid overtime. Okay? So you as an employer, right, can require people to say, let's say the first week in the pay period, somebody works 50 hours, and the next week they work 50 hours. The third week, you say, I'm just going to have this person work 20 hours, and the fourth week I'm going to have them work 20 hours for a total of 140 hours, which would be low, for example, the 212 or the 160 in your case, right, to make sure that you don't have to pay overtime or comp time, right? Questions about that?
Okay, very good.
Okay, so I just have a couple more slides. The next one is just about volunteers. Because you're a city, right, nonprofit entity, you can have people that volunteer for you, in various capacities. It's important to note there that if somebody's employed by the city, you shouldn't have them doing volunteer activities because the law says they really aren't a volunteer. They're really an employee, right? Especially if they're doing similar type services or they provide the same work, the volunteer is very similar to the work that they provide on a daily basis. Okay, so we do see that at issues sometimes, right? My background before I worked in federal government was a nonprofit, so we did a lot of volunteering, and we had to be very careful with that with our workers, right? They would say, well, I want to volunteer and do XYZ because we worked with kids. And it'd be like, well, you already work with kids. We can't have you stay and volunteer because we'd need to pay you for that time, right? It's the same work, very similar work that you're already doing. So just keep that in mind. And again, here's an example, right? A firefighter can't volunteer as a firefighter, right? Because you need to pay them for that time. An example of where somebody might be able to volunteer would be, here's a couple examples, right? A city police officer who volunteers as a part-time referee in a basketball league, right? Or an employee of a city park department who serves as a volunteer city firefighter. So if they're doing something that's completely different than their regular duties, then volunteering can be possible, but again, you have to be very, very careful because you're going to have many people out there that are paid on a salary, right? Or even if they're paid hourly, they're going to have other duties as assigned, right? Their job description is going to be very broad. So making sure that, if you have an example of something that wouldn't work would be a city police officer who you have volunteering at an event for crowd control, right? Well, police officers do crowd control naturally as part of their jobs. To have them volunteer to do that, right, would be too close to their regular duties, so that they would have to be paid. Record keeping, this is like I said, one of the last pieces we're going to talk about, right? It's important that hours worked are kept, that payroll is kept. You guys have great human resources and a payroll department, so that's not an issue. The reason this is very, very important that all those things are accurate is if you do have somebody complain to us, so say we're not getting paid correctly, having good records is a great defense, right? Somebody saying, well, I work 90 hours a week and I'm only getting paid for 70 or 60 or 40, right? And then we actually go out and do fact finding and find, oh, no, all the records show that you're really only working 45 hours a week. You might feel like it's 90, but it's not accurate, right? So very important that their records are accurate. And you must keep posters up of the different laws. FLSA is one of them. And again, like I said, I know Shelley does an excellent job of having those all up in all the different areas that are required. Things that the FLSA does not require, which is important, like I said, we talked about breaks. Vacation, holiday, severance, or sick pay is not written within the law, right? Again, meals or rest periods, I already talked about that. Holidays or vacations, none of that is required. Premium pay or overtime is not required is only required when people are working. So if somebody works 40 hours a week and in addition gets holiday, right? They end up working a 10-hour day for 4 days a week, and the 5th day is a holiday. Overtime does not have to be paid on that because overtime only has to be paid on actual hours worked. So very important to note that, right? And there's no pay raises or fringe benefit requirements, and there's no hours worked requirements in terms of how many hours somebody can work a day, right? That really has to be your own internal policy on determining when you want people working and not working, right? We have lots of different information. I've provided a few things for you guys. This is our handy reference guide that talks about a lot of these things and talks about the basic information around the Fair Labor Standards Act. I also gave you a brief summary of some of the different laws we enforce. And then I also provided for you a fact sheet number 8 that specifically addresses the law enforcement fire protection employees and how they can be paid differently. So that's it. And I also have business cards if you are interested in receiving those, or I can leave those with Shelley so you can have those. If you ever have questions, you can always reach out to me directly. I know this is only a 20-minute training, but any questions that you guys have, both for myself or Shelley, about any of the laws?
Yeah, so we might have some questions now. I think Councilor Stoddard got some.
Andrea, I had to chuckle just a little bit when you said nobody in Idaho gets paid under minimum wage. If the city councilor does their job, I did a little analysis several months ago, and over a 2-month period, mine pay was $1.75 an hour. That's if you do your job and read all the material. Yeah.
If you read the fine print.
I'm sure that's
Yeah,
true.
right.
Yeah, there's an exemption for publicly elected officials.
Anyway, the other thing I just, and just as from previous knowledge I had, I still see that the tip rate is at $30 for waiters and waitresses.
I can
Has that
explain
raised
that. Okay, so to be considered a tipped employee, an employee has to receive at least $30 in tips a month to be considered a tipped employee.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. Now, in Idaho, you can still claim a tip credit. At the federal level, that means that somebody can be paid $2.13 an hour and get the rest of their wages in tips. In Idaho, I'm pretty sure that's $3.15 an hour. And so employees do have to make the difference in tips to bring them up to at least $7.25 an hour. And so that is one of the places where it's still a requirement. Now, somebody, again, to be considered a tipped employee has to receive $30 regularly a month at least in tips, right? So if I get tips one time a month, randomly as a bartender or as a server, as a busser, let's say, that doesn't necessarily make me a tipped employee.
Yeah.
So that's what the thing is.
It just seemed to me that was awful low, because 2 meals you'll have $30 tip at some of the restaurants, and I just wonder why they don't raise that, because it doesn't seem to be fair.
And remember, the $30 requirement is just to classify employees as whether they're considered a tipped employee or not, right?
Okay.
So in terms of their tips, they need to be making at least $7.25 an hour, or they would be in violation of the law. So an employer can pay less than the minimum wage, right? Can pay, let's say, $4 an hour. and then the employee can get the rest in tips. If that employee does not make enough to bring them up to $7.25, then the employer needs to compensate them to bring them up. Obviously, the idea is that if somebody's really good at their job, they're making much more than $7.25 in tips, right? But under federal law, then, we would still say that they're just making $7.25. So for overtime purposes, then, they would need to be paid at least time and a half at the $7.25 an hour rate, no matter how many tips they're getting.
Okay, makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Councilor Williams.
Other
Thank you,
questions?
Mr. Mayor. Yeah, is family leave a federal, requirement, or is that a city consideration?
So family medical leave is a federal requirement. That's one of the laws that we also enforce. Some states have additional regulations. For example, Oregon just passed the Oregon Paid Leave Act. Tied to that, Idaho doesn't have that. So family medical leave in terms of being able to make sure that you have a job after 12 weeks. So if you need to take leave for your own serious health condition, right, or to care for somebody in your family that has a serious health condition, the law says that the employer needs to grant you at least 12 weeks of unpaid leave, right, before they can terminate you, right? So think of places that have manufacturing does this a lot, or production places where if you can only have so much leave and you get points, and if you accumulate more than, let's say, 10 points, then you can be terminated. So FMLA protects those workers because it's not just for 12 weeks, consecutive for, let's say, bonding with a child or because you have to have surgery, but it's also if you have a bad back or if you have migraines or something that maybe you need to take intermittent leave for those issues as they arise. And so that helps protect workers that, honor on a point system, for example, where if it's granted under the family medical leave, that can't count against the worker. So.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Just a comment.
Yeah, Councilor Doty.
I appreciate your presentation, and I also appreciate your tidiness with the time of 20 minutes. That was great. You gave us just what we needed and allowed people to answer questions, so good job today.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And again, if you do have, wish us to, for example, do a training on the Family Medical Leave Act or any other type of regulations that we enforce, we also do the visa, like H-2B and H-2A visa laws. We're the ones that enforce those. And so I know Idaho has one of the highest rates of certifications under the H-2A program, which is the agriculture program to bring workers in from other countries to work in agriculture. We actually continuously are in the top 3 or 4 states that ask those certifications. So if you ever have questions about any of those laws, just let Shelley know, and she can schedule another time for me to come. So, and I appreciate your time, and thank you for inviting me.
Yes, for sure. Thank you so much. We appreciate it. Shelley or Cassie, did you have anything else that you wanted to add, or? No. Okay. Very good. Thank you again. Very much appreciate you being here.
It was my pleasure. Thank you. Thank all of you, and thank you for your service as well. We appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you so much. Okay, so that is, again, it was just a workshop, so no decisions made at this time, just informational. We appreciate the opportunity to learn of that, for questions to be answered. And so we will conclude this workshop at this time and convene back at 6 p.m. for our regularly scheduled city council meeting. So go get in a quick nap or grab some lunch or dinner, I guess. You want to